on a more serious note, I just want to have a quick conversation about solar installations for those who are living in complexes. Obviously, with load shedding in phase 72.5, we're all looking for ways to reduce the impact and find ways of protecting ourselves against extended outages. And for some, that might just be a couple of rechargeable lights, maybe investing in an inverter. But if you are deciding that you want to go the full hog and install a solar power system, it can be a little bit more complex if you're living in a complex than if you're living in your own standalone home. I didn't even realize that until I read about it on the consumer finance website, Just Money. And it's a great pleasure to have their editor, Erica Liebenberg, with us via Zoom to explain. Erica, thanks for joining us. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much, Pippa.
So, this is all news to me, probably because it's been several decades since I lived in a sectional title complex. And at the time I did, we'd never heard of load shedding, so we didn't dream of solar. Are you able to just go ahead and install your own panels, or is it something that's got to get approval from the body corporate, the homeowners associations, etc.?
Yeah, so Pippa, there certainly are regulations with regards to installations for homeowners associations, and it varies depending on the type of association. But if you're in a sectional title property, it's actually really more strict because they're very specific about the common property management and approval for installations of items on the common property because they themselves are very heavily regulated. So what tends to happen is that, a shared solar option is installed in shared areas such as the roof of a complex or in carports. And then the owners, the individual owners share the cost of that via the body corporate.
Right.
If you live in a non-sectional title area and you've got a homeowners association, there's slightly more leeway because, you've got your own freestanding property typically, but there will still be regulations about where you can install your solar panels and what they need to look like. So, if you live within either of those circumstances in a complex, then you absolutely need to, at the very least, get approval. And if you have a homeowners association and your own freestanding property, other than the architectural regulations, you need to absolutely make certain that you're not contravening, for example, with generators. If you've got a backup generator, there'll usually be regulations around the kind of noise levels that are acceptable. And when the noise, when you're allowed to use the generator as such, if your solar, if you've run out of solar, if you haven't generated enough for the day, for example. So definitely a little bit more complicated for complex dwellers.
Erica, I'm just thinking, for example, you said, installing them on the shared roof of a complex. If you are the person whose, flat looks out onto the roof and is going to be staring directly at the solar panels, you might feel differently about that installation than the person living underneath that roof who doesn't have to look at them but does enjoy the benefit of having them there. Do you have the right to refuse if you are that person who says, I don't want this, I don't want to look at that, I don't want it near me? Do you have a right of refusal?
It actually depends on what you've agreed to when you've moved into the estate. So in terms of the rules that apply, they're governed and they're regulated. And for sectional title properties in particular to get their rules amended, it needs to be approved by the Community Schemes Ombuds Service. So in short, if you've agreed to it, not really, unless there's a change in rules. And honestly, Pip, I think, obviously it varies per person, but I think it's a small price to pay in terms of, just the convenience of sharing that solar installation and the costs. Because, if we look at the costs of freestanding houses that are obviously subject to no regulation whatsoever, you're absolutely standing on your own. And if you want to go off the grid completely, for example, which of course is everybody's dream, we all say we want to do it, you're looking at anything up to 350,000 Rand. Most homes, it's not going to quite amount to that. It depends obviously on your electricity usage, but at least in a sectional title property, you're splitting up the costs of installation, you're splitting up the cost of the inverters, the batteries and everything associated. The insurance of the complex would cover the insurance of those units, so you as an individual homeowner are not, liable for those costs. And in all honesty, I think, solar panels are aesthetically, they're not unattractive. It's not like you're looking at a great big eyesore or a really very noisy unit, such as is the case with an old school generator. So I think it's probably a small price to pay, but it's a fair question.
Absolutely. Erica, you mentioned insurance of the system, and that's an additional cost that people might too often overlook when they're starting to think about and budget for a solar installation. So just remind us how would it be insured if it was installed in a complex? You say that the body corporate would then be liable if it was a shared system, but that I'm assuming that your levies would then go up to compensate for that.
Exactly. Again, at least you're splitting it all between you. If you are in a complex and you're in a freestanding property and you're governed by a homeowners association, the insurance is completely your indaba. So, you've got to get in touch with your own insurer and make sure that it's adequately covered as part of your property. And, the thing is as well, so many insurers are not covering for surge protection. So if you've got like a step-on unit, so you're just protected, because, there's obviously various options and we can talk about those, but if you're still plugged into the grid at all, so if you're not completely off the grid, surges are liable to damage your inverters and your batteries. So, you need to make sure you've got distribution board protection. But even then, what insurers have taken to doing is not covering, anything that can be remotely associated with surge protection. Even if you can prove that you had surge protection at times, you need to fight the fight. Yeah. And everybody's excess has gone up. So even if you have surge protection. So for example, in my home, I have a distribution board surge protector, and I can highly recommend that. Yeah. It's a much more cost-effective option than per plug point. But my insurer got in touch with me to say your excess it nearly doubled. And I said to them, okay, I'm assuming this relates to all of the power surge claims that are being made. However, I have power surge protection. I've got a certificate. It's been professionally installed. Can we not waive the excess increase for folk like myself? And they said no.
Gosh.
So, we're all bearing the brunt of it. So any unit that you do get installed, that you get insured, bear that in mind.
Okay, thank you. Just for those who've come in late to the conversation, Erica Liebenberg is with us via Zoom. She's the editor of consumer finance website Just Money, and we're talking about the ins and outs of putting in a solar system if you're in a complex rather than a freestanding privately owned home. Now, very interesting question in from Anonymous on the WhatsApp line saying, could I remove the solar system that I put in if I move out of the complex? So I'm assuming there it must be a standalone home within a complex and they installed their own solar system. Is it their right to take it with them when they leave? And if not, the question is, what about the monies I spent putting it in?
Yeah, so if obviously you've got it exactly right, Pippa, if it's a private home, that equipment, lock, stock and barrel, belongs to that person. If it's a shared property and in any way the costs have been shared, then no, they're not going to be able to take that unit with them. And usually what happens as well with big ticket expenditure, and it obviously depends on what is agreed, with a resolution, at meetings where things, because obviously usually with big expenditures, there would be an annual general meeting, those expenses would be presented, a certain number of proxies and attendees would need to be there and they'd need to vote on whether they're happy to go ahead. But what does tend to happen is that the cost gets split up over time. So even though that person might feel, a little bit cheated to the extent that, but hey, I paid a huge fee, actually what's probably happened is that fee has been split over time. Yeah. And if that person had to calculate what they would have spent with tariff increases over that period of time, they've probably come out even though they're leaving the equipment behind. And if they're leaving before the full repayment, then whoever moves in after them is going to pick up with the increase in levies, if that's been split over time. So it is a pretty equitable system. It's usually worked out, bearing in mind that people do need to move on, they do need to sell properties. So all of that is usually taken into consideration.
Okay. Look, the next question is one that is going to apply equally to those who live in standalone homes as much as it does to those who live in complexes. But Erica, we hear several times a week from listeners who have been taken for a ride by fly-by-night solar installers, shall we say. There are unfortunately a lot of scam artists out there who are taking advantage of the long waiting lists, the huge demand and people's desperation to get the systems in, and are either cutting corners and doing a bad job or are taking their money and disappearing altogether. Any advice in general for homeowners who are thinking about a solar installation? What are some of the big things you need to be sort of assessing before you sign on the dotted line and looking for?
Yeah, absolutely, Pippa. Yeah, fly-by-night's big problem, and unfortunately, the sector is not regulated. Believe it or not,
Sure.
It's just not. And so, any complaints can be directed to the Consumer Goods and Service Ombudsman if there's anybody out there listening that's had a problem. But just to give an indication, the CGSO received 202 complaints between February this year and last year. and they actually don't really have teeth. They can only make recommendations because it's not regulated. So very critical, as you say, before you buy, to do your due diligence. So the first thing would be choose an established company. If the price seems too good to be true, I can guarantee you it is too good to be true. Look for someone who's got at least 3 years of installation experience, that has technically competent staff, and that has efficient post-installation service. And you can check for this by looking at reviews. So you'll find, consumer reviews on social media platforms, on Google. So have a look for those. And also, you're well within your rights to request contactable references. I mean, this is a significant expenditure that you're making. Any supplier who is not willing to supply you with contactable references, you need to question first their resolve, and secondly, whether they're even worth their salt. So I would walk away on that basis already and shop around. Look for 3 or more quotes with comparable information. And this is where it gets tricky, because your system size, it's not just your price, obviously, you want to look at, but your system size and brands and models of equipment matter. Certain brands and models are guaranteed for 5 or 10 years. Certain brands and models are cheaper and they're known to be junk, and they've barely got a warranty at all, other than the statutory, minimum requirement of 6 to 12 months. So look for that. And also, you need to estimate your energy production. You need to understand what the unit is going to, fully fitted, is going to produce for you, and what you are going to need. And the other thing is, Pippa, because a lot of the complaints that the CGSO received related to installation schedules and suppliers, yes, eventually installing, but months and months and months after the money had been paid. So agree on an installation schedule up front. Don't pay up front and then hope that they're going to arrive. You need to have it in writing and get a warranty. You absolutely need to get a warranty, and not just on the parts, but also on the installation work that's being done.
That's a really useful tip. So on the installation itself, not just the parts of the system. Okay. You've echoed what our DIY man Angelo told us last month about being very, very cautious of anybody who expects full payment up front. He has had horror story after horror story of suppliers either running away as outright scam artists or going under halfway through the job and not finishing the work. Somebody's just WhatsApped us to say we've been asked to pay a 75% deposit for our system to be installed in September. Does that sound fair to you?
Look, I think, again, it comes down to, is this a reputable company? Has it been established for at least 3 years? Are the customer reviews good? Is this company trustworthy? I think that's almost more the question than the actual deposit amount, because, 75% towards a reputable supplier is money that it's pretty safe. If you've done your due diligence, if it's clear that they've been around for a long time, if the customer reviews are favourable, if you've checked the contactable references and you're really happy to go ahead, that is less of a concern to me than, let's say, paying 10% to someone that you're not sure about, because that 10% could be as good as gone. The scammers are rife, and not just with solar, but with lithium iode batteries. You've got guys on Facebook that are selling stuff at really low prices. Be cautious, be dubious, be cynical if that's what it takes. But do your checks and balances, and you can pay a deposit. Personally, I'd probably want to try and negotiate down from 75%. But certain things are also really important, such as the installation schedule. So am I paying 75%, but they're only going to install in 3 months, or am I paying 75% and they'll be here tomorrow? Erica, those are the other questions.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful, extremely practical advice you've shared with us, and it's greatly appreciated. Erica Liebenberg, the editor at consumer finance website Just Money.